Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm your host, Robert Durden, and I'm here with Ian Berg for another episode. We're going to talk for about an hour here. We're going to kind of spitball as usual. We've got a couple of things we might touch on, and not in any particular order. We're talking about Biden, a couple of things here. He seems to be backing off of marijuana hardcore because he fired a bunch of staffers for past marijuana use. He fell down some stairs or fell up some stairs while trying to get on Air Force One, which got more headlines than it probably should have, but it's hilarious anyways. You can't raise those feet super high when your dopamine receptors don't work very well, do they? And then he seems to be open to an infrastructure bill and some sort of taxation plan that includes raising taxes on the wealthy. So those are good things. We'll touch on those a little bit here. The squad, how long are we going to give them to get something done? Mostly I want to just kind of spitball and decide, do we wait a week or a month or 2 months or 6 months for them to get a floor vote on Medicare for All right now? I'm on the side of getting them to do it as quick as possible, which is just a couple of weeks, maybe a month. But we'll talk about that. The Iraq War turns 18. We're not going to talk about that too much.
It can legally vote.
Exactly.
Good for it.
Yeah, that's the only thing legal about it.
Yeah.
But so that's 18 now. That's sad. And it has, I'm sure, about the approval rating of the Afghanistan war, which is something like 12 to 17%, depending on who you ask.
That was like a poll 5 years ago.
Right. So it's we've been there 18 years now. Washington D.C. decriminalized psychedelics. That was awesome. So we might talk about that. And then I'd like to talk about Blizzard's CEO, and you sent me this link, which was awesome. Blizzard's CEO basically laid off a whole bunch of workers and had an enormous payout at the same time, within 24 hours of each other.
Around 1,000 workers, a little over 1,000, and he made $200 million.
So actually,
bonus.
Let's talk about that first. So I'm going to let you run with it. I did watch the video and I read the article.
Yeah. So most people, if you're into the whole GameStop thing, or you got into the video game companies, have a really bad tendency to lay off people. And the way I see it is they hire on people for a project, and then when the project is over, they lay them off. Okay, kind of scummy. You could always move them to another project or whatever have you, but I could understand that maybe more when video games were a smaller industry, but now they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. They make plenty of money, especially Activision.
Yeah, Blizzard.
And so laying workers off is one thing. Okay, are you hurting? Do you have to do it to keep whatever going? Yada yada yada. But what happens is they don't have to lay off those workers. They make plenty of money, and on top of that, the CEO is given a bonus that's more than what it would be to just keep the people anyway. So basically he's shafting the hard workers who oftentimes have to work extra hours, 80-hour weeks with absolutely no overtime pay, which is illegal in the States. I know Activision has some stuff in Canada. I don't know how their labor laws are, but I'm assuming they're
better than ours.
More strict than ours. And so not only do they shaft workers the entire time that the workers are, developing the game, and they push them real hard. The crunch time is a big thing that they talk about, where they can't go home, they sleep in the office, they don't see their family or their friends, they're just doing programming non-stop to hit these insane deadlines, and then once the game's released, they lay everybody off, and then the CEOs make massive amounts of money when they could have just given that to the workers or kept the workers on. And that's not only... Now, granted, it is very bad in the video game industry, and Activision is not the only company that does this. Most of the time, if there's a game that's been made, after it's come out, probably 50% of the workers are gone right after that. And so there are now talks of unionization coming into play, just like in Amazon, they're trying to get unions as well. And so that's a good thing, but the problem is these CEOs they don't see them as people. They just see them as numbers. And they're just like, we're just going to save a little bit of money. I'm going to get this giant bonus because, why not? I do nothing but screw people's lives over.
Yep.
I don't really think the CEOs in these companies have anything decent to add to these games. Most of the time, you'll see a really good game when it's, like, presented and they've cut everything out and then they give this bare bones thing. So in my opinion, the CEOs are actually worse for the games than the employees are. I'd say keep the employees, but that's why I'm a big fan of democratic workplaces and unions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be huge to have Blizzard unionize. That would be awesome because they're like for those of you that don't follow video games, they're like the Walmart of video games. They're like the Amazon. They have a monopoly on the market. They're not a monopoly, but they're the biggest company as far as I know.
Yeah,
for gaming.
There's like EA, Blizzard.
They own EA. I thought they owned EA.
I don't know if they
might have bought them out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong on that one. But the point I'd like to make on this is an example of trickle up economics, and this is why I'm so against people talking about enriching CEOs because then it'll trickle down. Exactly the opposite happens. Whenever the CEOs have a chance to shaft the workers and get a big payday, they do. This is an example of that. So trickle-down economics doesn't actually work. It always trickles up. They just tell you that if you give the CEOs a bunch of, tax breaks and money, that it'll trickle down to the workers, and it just simply isn't true.
Right. I don't know the name of the company. There are some good CEOs out there.
Yeah.
There is a company, I believe it's either in Silicon Valley, California. Like I said, the story came out a long time ago, so it's kind of out of my brain at the moment. But he read a study where it said that the majority of people, after they make $75,000 a year, they are the happiest. And their happiness doesn't really increase in relation to monetary gain after that. Because $75,000 a year is typically enough to be very financially secure. And when you're not worried about your finances, there are a lot of things that, make your life easier. You're not worried about childcare. You're not worried so much about medical bills, although that's still that could be.
But at $70,000 a year, you're more comfortable.
If your car breaks down, okay, you can get that fixed. If you need a new water heater, you can get that. Those kinds of things are a big weight off of your chest. And so when he read that study, he decided that everybody that works for his company is going to get raises up to $75,000, and he took a pay cut to make sure that happened.
Yep.
Now, what's interesting is, we should all applaud him right off the bat, but what also happened is his company grew. So not only was he getting resumes from very, very qualified or overqualified candidates, but he was getting tons of those. That sifting through those is really difficult. So as a CEO, you have to think, I'm getting the cream of the crop to work for my company because I'm treating them well. And on top of that, because of the good press he received and because people want to do business with a company that treats their employees well, his company grew. And that's all because he took a pay cut. The CEO decided, I'm going to cut down my own and give it to the employees. And so what I find funny is a lot of conservatives that I know, because we live in the Midwest, they often tout about how you shouldn't mess with the CEOs, you should let them get the money, they earned that money. Well, one, most CEOs get into that position because they know somebody, or they're the son of somebody.
Right, yep.
They usually went to Ivy League schools. A recent article came out, and I don't have that on me, but I'll definitely look into it and send you that link, that was saying how most Ivy League students don't really use the degrees they get. They go there for networking.
Right, yeah. Not surprising.
And so,
it's a big club, and you ain't in it.
Right. And so what happens is you have these people, these CEOs, that make all this extra money not doing extra work, not being very hard workers or earning that through merit, and then they shaft their employees. And all the studies show that if you take some of that away from the CEO and you divvy it up for the workers, the economy does better, the company does better, everything does better. But then you also have to go back to some other studies done on psychology, and it shows that a majority of CEOs are sociopaths.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't allow them to divvy up wages, man.
Yep. Now, I'm not attacking sociopaths. For instance, 90% of surgeons are sociopaths. Now, I would much rather have a surgeon that just wants, like, that clean, spotless record of no deaths for the bragging rights, than somebody who's going to be, like, crying midway cutting into me.
Yeah, of course.
So I'm fine with there being sociopaths in certain instances, but when it comes to positions of power, people that tend to be on the spectrum of sociopathy are going to want those positions of power based on their psychology. And so when you look at Reaganomics and trickle-down economics, every time it's implemented, it has never worked. And conservatives always think that it's good for the economy. But they're also the same ones that say socialism has never worked, or democratic socialism has never worked. And so I'm thinking there are multiple countries where it's implemented and working just fine, but there's not a single country where trickle-down economics has been implemented and is working for the worker, and you're still touting that. So can you at least be consistent?
No, they're inconsistent and they're sociopaths.
Yeah.
And the guy you're talking about, his name is Dan Price. He's the CEO of Gravity Payments. Gravity Payments is a competitor with PayPal.
Okay.
And he's awesome. He also tweets like a mofo. He's awesome. Follow him on Twitter. He's awesome. He's got a bunch of followers now, and of course, that's I think who you're talking about. He raised all of his workers' wages to $75,000 and cut his salary tremendously. I think he dropped it to exactly theirs, and they got a 220% increase in productivity within a year.
Well, yeah, you're going to want to work hard when the company is taking care of you.
So that's what I'm saying. So that's awesome. I hope that Blizzard and Activision do unionize. That would be awesome.
Oh, yeah, me
It'd be
too.
good. I would love to see a slew of unionization after Amazon and Blizzard and Walmart and McDonald's, all of them, Starbucks, start to fall.
And I don't think it's so much like, you don't have to go through a company. You could just have, so for instance, there are unions for contractors, and unions for welders, and unions for pipe fitters.
Yep.
And so you don't have to, there's unions that are tied to a company, but if they formed an independent union of game developers, well, whenever they got hired somewhere, guess what? I'm in a union.
Yep.
And that would actually give the unions more power, because it would encapsulate multiple companies. And it would also make it harder for that union to be corrupted by said companies. So, for instance, we live in the Midwest. Caterpillar is very large here. Kroger is another big store. And there's Caterpillar unions and Kroger unions. And from my anecdotal evidence from talking to people who worked in those fields, those unions are pretty much useless. Because they're basically just saddling up to the corporations. So you need it to be a little more independent, but I do really hope it happens. I'm also happy that gig workers, like Uber drivers and DoorDash employees and all those other ones, are also trying to form unions, because they deserve to be treated like employees.
Absolutely, not independent contractors. No, I mean, I'm a chiropractor, and I was independent contracted at a company who I will not name right now, after a year working there. And what they did to me is they IC'd me and gave me a raise, but then when tax time came along, the raise that they gave me was basically exactly what I ended up owing in taxes, so there was no wage, or no raise. So it was, there's no union where I worked either. I would love it, and I would love for chiropractors to also unionize, because they're being turned into wage slaves as well in a lot of ways. I've never made more than $40,000 a year. I've been in the gig for 6 years.
I think it's important because there's a talk of the whole minimum wage increase, and I definitely think setting a good floor is necessary in the United States. But if you're not going to do that, if you're not for a minimum wage increase, you have to be for strong, powerful unions, because workers need protection. Now, I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, you sign a contract with a company, you agree to it, yada, 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 but they don't take into account, if I live in a certain area and this is the most pay I can get for my time, even if it's not enough pay, I have to take it.
You have no bargaining power against these hyper, mega conglomerates. You can't bargain with Amazon or Planet Fitness or whatever. You just have to take what they're given or kick rocks.
Exactly. And sometimes you can't kick rocks. Sometimes you can't hold out for a better
there are no better jobs. Yep.
So, there's that, and there's one thing that I wanted to bring up that's not on your list, but since we're talking about the Midwest and stuff, so I was listening to the Humanist Report, Mike Figueredo,
Yep.
who I do like a lot of his stuff. I listen to him every day, and I like his take. But there was one that he came out with, and it was conservatives have no ideas. And I was like, okay, if this is poking fun at conservatives, like, I'll give it a watch, why not? And he raised, most of his points were good points. But what he said is, the reason that a lot of conservatives stick to the culture war stuff is because if they actually went into detail about their economic plans, nobody would agree with them, and nobody would be for them. But you and I both know, living in the Midwest, that's completely false.
Definitely not true.
There are a lot of people, a lot of conservatives that I talk to on a daily basis that think the minimum wage increase would be detrimental to businesses, that think unions are awful, that think trickle-down economics is literally the best way, that tax cuts for the wealthy, and the CEOs making all that money, they somehow earned it, and those tax cuts are just, if you don't tax them, they'll wanna stay here, and that money will go to the They basically, what I would say is they've been brainwashed by propaganda, because none of the studies ever done have ever showed that would work. Now I do know that companies move to places with less taxes, so they can pay less taxes. That's why a lot of companies move from California to Texas. And I know that Illinois is not the best economically. Now, I don't know how much that has to do with our tax policies or other things. I do know that some businesses have kind of a stranglehold on Illinois, because I have brought up before how Google wanted to test their new internet, but because Xfinity's in here, Xfinity basically went to the government and was like, yeah, we don't want competition, so tell them to kick rocks, and they did, and that really sucks, because they would have upgraded our infrastructure for free, and yada, yada, yada. And so, I think if you live in a larger metropolis area, like if you live in Atlanta, Georgia, or you live in LA, in California, or you live in New York, there's a lot of progressives, there's a lot of lefties. And so it's easy to think, well, of course, this is the dub position, this is how I feel, and all the science and all the things I've read and all the studies done by all the think tanks says that this is the way things should work, so that's my opinion, so it only makes sense that the rest of the country feels that way. But you also have to remember that the majority of Americans are very scientifically illiterate. The majority of Americans, and not saying that is like an attack on anyone's character, it's easy to be scientifically illiterate.
Right, and it's not any fault in their personality that they're uneducated, and that's where Figueredo is he's wrong, is that he just thinks that he wants to dismiss them. And I don't like being dismissive of anybody. I think that's giving into a narrative that the mainstream media wants people to believe, and it's silly that Figueredo would fall into it, because of course that's what like CNN and MSNBC would have you believe if you drink their Kool-Aid, is that they're dumb, they're not worth saving, they're deplorables, they don't have any good ideas. Which is like, no, it's not that they don't have any good ideas, it's that they're drinking the other Kool-Aid. So we need to talk everybody down, but it's not a red-blue thing.
Or it's all like...
It's a mainstream media propaganda thing.
Right, all Trumpists are racists.
Right, no, not true.
All boogaloos are evil. All Antifa members want to, like, go into the suburbs and burn your house down. It's just like there's this narrative, but no human is black and white. Everybody is immensely complex. And so there are plenty of people that distrust science and distrust the media. And if you look at the history of, the politics in science, and if you look at the history of all the times that the media has lied to us or the government has lied to us, then it becomes more clear why people lean certain ways. Because there is always inherent bias. You're going to want to back up that inherent bias. And so when you search anything on the internet, you're going to get, well, this is all the things that disagree with me, and these are all the things that agree with me, and they both use very complex wording, and they both mention things like study.
If you don't know any better.
And so it's also a problem, too, with American schools. They don't teach critical thinking, which I think is very detrimental to society, especially in a world of misinformation. But I think a lot of lefties out there need to kind of take a step back, and we talk about all on the show all the time about healthy debates and knowing your opponent and admitting when you're wrong. Take a step back and realize, like, you might have put yourself in a bubble too. And you need to think, how many times a day or a week or a month even am I challenging my own beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to do that enough that it'll keep you open-minded. And it'll prevent you from being in a bubble. And so I definitely think Mike Figueredo and some of the other ones I went against, Jimmy Dore, because he spoke to a Boogaloo member, and even like Kyle Kalinske, sometimes I've seen everybody, even me or you, we're all guilty of being in a bubble and thinking everybody feels a certain way because, of course, it makes sense that everyone feels a certain way. And we need to kind of like realize that whatever position you have on anything, there's somebody somewhere that is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, and it's okay. And Figueredo, he's normally good. What he gets into is I think he gets very fed up with Republicans. He sees that the mainstream media on the left is all bad Republicans, bad Republicans, bad Republicans, but he ends up seeming like he is drinking the Kool-Aid, but I don't think that's what he really believes. Right. I think he just was probably just having a bad day, and he's acting like they're a monolith when they're really not. Right. Everybody's individually, and that's what I try to do is, like, people are bad with labels. A lot of times they call themselves Republicans until they talk to somebody like us that goes, well, what does that mean to you? And then you talk to them for 20 or 30 minutes, and you realize they're not really Republicans. They just grew up in a Republican family, don't know any better, and they're like, my beliefs actually more coincide with you. I just labeled myself wrong. And that happens with both sides of the aisle. So I don't like to use those terms and act like all Republicans are dumb or all Democrats are dumb.
Yeah, we're kind of in a country, and it's like we're given a square hole and we're given a circular hole. And then you look and it's like, well, which one of these do you fit in? And you might be a rhombus. Or you might be an octagon, and you're just like, I don't fit into either of these, but I guess I gotta pick which one I'm most like.
Yeah.
And so typically it's like hot button issues, like guns I see as a big one. And you'd think like more of the people that I know that swing more libertarian, you'd think they'd be more democratic because democratic policy tends to be
socially libertarian are lefties.
Right, but they tend to go more for the gun thing or the anti like SJW censorship culture war kind of thing. But what also I think a lot of them need to realize is back when Sandy Hook happened and a lot of Republicans came out and they were like, Obama's going to take the guns. He didn't even try. No. He didn't even push for reforms.
No.
And so...
very right-wing on that.
And
I'm okay with that, I mean, yeah. I don't want all guns taken, just to be clear.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with anybody having any gun, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't want anybody having crazy full auto
No,
weapons,
that's the one thing and that's what I call common sense gun reform. That's got 92% favorability rating, which is like no, enormous, rounds where you can't extend the rounds or whatever they're called, extended magazines, no bump stocks, no automatic weapons, but no mandatory buybacks either. So if the automatic weapons are still out there, I'm not going to force you to give them back, but no more sales, banning the sales from in the future, and that's got 92% favorability rate.
Right, and it's also the propaganda and the vilification of the enemy. Mm-hmm. So I have a friend of mine. He's very libertarian, and he's for police reform. He's for Medicare for all. But he considers himself a Republican who are against all those things, and that's almost because he is entirely for don't touch my guns.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very dangerous to be a single issue kind of person. But I also think it's easy to be swayed because you think Democrats are all trying to, all the Democrats are trying to censor me and silence me, and they think Mr. Potato Head's transgender and yada yada yada. But what you have to realize is none of these people that run these giant companies that are censoring people, they're not going out there and doing it because of a political ideology. They're doing it for money.
Yeah.
They're silencing dissent because they want to be able to advertise to the widest majority possible. Well, how do you do that? You get rid of polarization. You make everybody gray. And if everybody's great,
Yep.
then I can advertise to everybody. The Dr. Seuss company, they got rid of a couple of bad-selling books. They said they're racist, but it was a private company, not Democrats doing it.
Yeah, right.
And so a lot of the Republicans will come out and say, oh, the left is trying to silence everybody, when in reality, the left is sitting here trying to get Medicare for all, and trying to get strong unions, and trying to raise the minimum wage, and legalize drugs, and end the wars. We don't care if you call somebody the wrong pronoun 98% of the time, okay? And the 2% is usually if you're being a dick.
Yeah,
We just
right.
want you to not be a dick anymore.
Yeah, right.
No one's trying to pass legislation. And so I think a lot of that is trapped in your own bubble, not seeing the other side for who they really are, not seeing those nuances. And so I try to remember that if somebody disagrees with me, hey, they're not all bad. Some of them are. Some of them are just rotten people.
But, you know, those PFCs, you just let them go, and you got to decide for yourselves who's worth talking to, and you'll know pretty quickly, I think, if you know how to spot the people that have drank the Kool-Aid. They come off culty. They're easy to spot. So
the more flags they fly on their truck, honestly.
right? No, you're not going to talk those people down. Not worth your time.
No.
But let's talk real quickly about the squad, and I already did an episode on how they're trying to force the vote, which they're really not forcing the vote. They're more like asking for a vote.
Yeah, there's no leverage.
Right, exactly. And that's the problem is, like, they can talk as much as they want, and they can try to tweet and try to leverage Nancy Pelosi, but the fact is she's got her house, or she's the speaker now, she's got her job. 1 second.